So I just wanted to provide a few thoughts on the evolution of Russian drone and missile technology that we've seen since 2022. So my views on this are as the Russian military continues to adapt and evolve and modify its missile strikes against Ukraine for increasing reliability and accuracy in an attempt to evade and saturate Ukrainian air defense systems. And since they declared a partial mobilization in September of 2022, their missile production rates have risen far above pre-war levels. And they've repurposed older Soviet anti-ship cruise missiles, for example, to target apartment buildings in Ukraine, and air defense missiles into land attack roles to supplement what they can do. The dramatic increase in Russian one-way attack drones, many initially derived from Iranian designs, have supplemented Russia's missile stockpiles, and we see salvos against Ukraine varying from 30 missiles to over 150 to 200, although the larger salvos are more rare. The Russian military is regularly experimenting with different strike patterns, as the general has articulated, as they try to overwhelm Ukrainian air defense systems. These include techniques like varying missile flight paths that double back on targets, or they loop around cities for a few hours before they hit their intended target. They change altitudes, and they now employ different types of penetration aids like chaff, flare, or hardening against jamming. The Russian military is using complex attacks, again, as the general has already articulated, to coordinate their arrival times on a target from several different types of missiles, whether they be air-launched, sea-launched, ground-launched, from several different locations inside Russia or the Black Sea. And they are structured to arrive on target within minutes of one another in an attempt to saturate the defenders. This is not something that the Russian military was capable of doing in 2022, and unfortunately they continue to experiment with this to make it increasingly difficult for Ukraine's air defenders to engage. They also are using different types of warheads, occasionally cluster munitions, against civilian and military targets, in addition to the thermobaric rockets associated with long-range artillery systems like TOS-1 and TOS-2. And Ukrainian air defense teams are consistently and constantly improving their abilities to intercept these missiles, particularly against the cruise missile varieties. Ballistic missiles, they do pose more of a challenge, particularly missiles like the Kinzhal hypersonic missile, and some that have complicated flight profiles. They are difficult to intercept, or there's areas of Ukraine that have insufficient air defense coverage due to its size. And the air defense batteries and the air defense teams are high-value targets for the Russian Federation to try to destroy. And Russian reconnaissance strike has improved over the past 2 or 3 years to where if the Patriot teams are deployed too far forward and remain stationary for too long, they are often targeted with Iskander missiles near the front lines or within strike range. And the Russians are targeting a variety of military and civilian infrastructure, and while I don't have access to their targeting deck or their strike plans or what their intentions are, just from observing since for the past 3 years, I conclude that there appears to be no sufficient process or lack of effort to limit civilian collateral damage. And there are times where it appears that civilian facilities are themselves the target. Examples include, that we've all seen, include strikes at civilian hospitals, busy shopping centers in the middle of the day, high-rise apartment buildings that are targeted with Soviet-era missiles that were designed to sink an aircraft carrier, so there is no accuracy in an urban environment, or ballistic missiles that are armed with cluster munitions that land in populated city centers. A few words about drones. Again, the general has already articulated many of the challenges. In my view, this is the most dramatic aspect of the change in warfare in the past 3 years, has been the evolution in unmanned warfare and drone warfare by both the Ukrainian and the Russian militaries. This includes loitering munitions, first-person view drones, one-way attack drones, and other reconnaissance strike complexes that have made most types of movement within 30 kilometers of the front line on either side to be very difficult. And the rise of Russian wired or fiber optic drones since 2024 is a particular challenge to counter, although I do note that Ukraine is catching up quickly in this area. And the general has already articulated the production rates of the Shahed-2 drones at Albuga, so I'll just skip over that. And I do want to note the size of the attacks that we are looking at has risen even from January of this year to 100 drones per day to 500, 700 on average, and it's anticipated to climb. Not only are the numbers increasing, but the Russian engineers have made qualitative improvements to these one-way attack drones to make them more lethal and difficult to intercept, including dark paint, special coating in an attempt to reduce their flight signatures, pop-up maneuvers that they do at terminal descent, where they fly straight up and down to try to evade the Ukrainian air teams. They fly faster, they modify their flight paths. It's becoming very complicated. They also fly in Belarusian airspace. They hug the border until the last moment, and then they fly in to reach their target. They are not just using them for attack, but they also use them for missions to map locations of Ukrainian air defense teams or other detection networks, other military assets, and as the general noted, they do add decoys to overwhelm or complicate the work of the air defenders. And I think we have to talk about what is happening right now in Kherson City. This is what is referred to as human safari, where Russian drone units there not only target military logistics around the city, but they are also specifically targeting civilians on the street of the city. Come on in, guys. They not only target civilians who are carrying their groceries home or women bicycling home, but unfortunately has now extended to a toddler playing in his playpen in his own backyard. So this is a targeted harassment of the civilian population that has been underway since late 2022 when Russia had to leave the city. And I just wanted to include this line from the UN's Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine in May of this year that concluded, quote, Russian armed forces have committed the crimes against humanity of murder and the war crimes of attacking civilians through a month-long pattern of drone attacks targeting civilians on the right bank of the Dnipro River in Kherson province in Ukraine. It also found that these acts were committed with the primary purpose to spread terror among the civilian population in violation of international humanitarian law, close quote. This behavior, we should anticipate, could emerge elsewhere along the front line, even if there's a ceasefire in place, unless careful guardrails are established in the settlement. And a few concluding thoughts from me. The Ukrainian Air Defense network, as it is now, is not sufficient to protect all of the country given the size and complexity of that task. But as long as this network is operational and supported by partners, it intercepts the majority of missiles, particularly cruise missiles, and it also has a deterring effect on the Russian Air Force. The Russian Air Force remains reluctant to losing more aircraft, and as long as Ukraine's air defense shield remains viable, the Russian Air Force will hold back its tactical aviation. And by the Russians' own admission in their own defense publications, they admit that their own air defense network, while it's very dense and it's learning all the time, still faces critical challenges like friendly fire, and they find it difficult to engage Ukrainian drone strikes that are heading into Russia when they are flown in specific ways. And I think it's useful to remember, if this problem seems large and looming and growing, that there are still critical vulnerabilities in Russian military power that are enduring and can be exploited. And I would share the general's assessment that one of the most efficient and yet difficult ways is to reduce Russian missile strike potential is to damage or destroy the launch platforms themselves. This means certain types of ships, certain types of bombers, as Operation Spiderweb did, and various ground launch platforms. And I think more effective or purpose-built interceptors to use against Russian attack drones would also be critically important for Ukraine given the rate of production increase that we are looking at this year. And there are rumors in different types of technologies in development to address this. And the bad news here, and there is quite a lot of it, is that Russia is aware of the slow production rates of Western air defense systems, Patriot NASAMS, IRIS-T. And over time, they hope to destroy Ukraine's will to continue fighting and to attrit or destroy its air defense capabilities with nightly strikes while damaging critical infrastructure and depopulating frontline cities like Kharkiv or Kherson or potentially Dnipro, whose civilians are struggling with the extended timeline of these frequent attacks. And they seek to convince the West that they will never produce enough to resolve this challenge. But I have had the opportunity to meet with some of Ukraine's air defenders teams, and the ways that they are modifying our equipment, the partnership that we have, the way they are pushing the equipment to technical heights that we did not even think possible. It is a true partnership and one that I hope continues. I've seen firsthand the operators, and I've seen firsthand the work that they do to protect the cities. So thank you very much for your time.